So, after 24 years since your book was published, now what's your take on today's China?
If we started with a strong China, then with students and the public alike, you have a different kind of view of the period of weakness.
So if today you still write a book about today's China, who will be your main characters?
I was thinking mainly of the first Chinese who came to Europe, that we have careful information, and that is Shen Fuzhong.
今天我们的采访对象是 Jonathan Spence 石景谦老先生，他是耶鲁大学的历史学教授，他对中国的研究非常丰富，著作颇丰，作品包括《天安门》、探索当代中国、朝鲜与康熙等。我非常期待今天上午与石景谦老先生的对话。Let me start with your classic book about the search for modern China. I think it's published 24 years ago. And in this book, you mentioned that by looking back at the history of late Ming and the Qing dynasties, we can gain a sharp understanding of the forces now confronting each other inside China and of the chances for or against the troubled nation at the last claiming its place in the world. So, after 24 years since your book was published, now what's your take on today's China?
Well, it's one makes these big generalizations, and then you wait to see if they were accurate or not. The thing that most interested me was that perhaps in more conventional histories of China, as we entered the 1990s, there was a sense that Chinese history began with failure, collapse, either of the Ming or of the Qianlong era sort of political structure. And we lived with that. That was the way China tended to be taught. Collapse followed by deeper collapse, and then some kind of dramatic change or revolutionary redeployment of national resources. And so I felt that in my teaching a general introductory class at Yale University, I thought, what would happen if we just started with a much more powerful China, integrated despite huge tensions and some warfare. But if we started with a strong China, then with students and the public alike, you have a different kind of view of the period of weakness. The period of weakness is not therefore a long-going process. It's actually a shorter progress in a pattern of change and real development. I tried to be careful because not to overgeneralize, totally beyond my knowledge. China is so huge. I stayed with that. There's just been a new edition of that, Search Modern China, so that's the third edition now. It's just come out in America. And it's been translated a lot, so I hope that my judgments were correct, but it's hard to know looking into the future how you're going to stand up, how your work is going to stand up.
I think your books have been going after the evidence of Western cultures, Western technologies, the influence of Western cultures on China. So do you think that this influence still carry weight today? And what's the relationship between today's China and the Western world?
It's a huge question. I think China came into the People's Republic period with a very large legacy, of troubles and in the past, and a very mixed series of relationships with foreign powers. And sometimes that relationship had been quite encouraging, and I did one of my first books just after I was a student. I called "To Change China," 改变中国, and that was looking at a stream of influence coming from the West that was being used to analyze China right from the Ming dynasty onwards. So I was ready to accept that. I mean, it seemed to me that was maybe part of the way his history had unfolded itself. And then the question then is, why did things go so sour? Why did they get so bad? And it was partly, I think, because of imperial weakness in China, but it was also because of imperial pressure and a very demanding series of sort of kickbacks to be made by the Chinese. So we call that usually the treaty port system. And the treaty port was a way of limiting China's development of its own resources and leaving the management of those resources to foreigners. And that eventually became unacceptable.
I think you're specializing in giving your readers our Chinese broad picture of China by telling individual stories. So if today you still write a book about today's China, who will be your main characters? Or who are your main characters?
In the first talk I gave in Beida, I was thinking mainly of the first Chinese who came to Europe, that we have careful information, and that is Shen Fuzhong, who is from Nanjing territory, but who also was a Catholic. It's well recorded that in 1687, long ago, in that time, Shen reached Europe and actually went to Paris and to Rome and to London and then finally to Oxford University. And so Shen used this time, some of it he had religious mission, but other times he had more what we nowadays call cultural diplomacy. He met with some British scientists. He actually met with the King of England, who had curiosity about China and wanted to ask a few questions. And he met the King of France, King Louis of France. And I was intrigued by this again, because it was a study of language and cultural contact and flexibility. And again, it tells a different story than the kind of changeless China. This is a very adaptable China with international language, which we've never had since, which was Latin. So Latin was known to Chinese Catholics and to Western intellectuals. And so it was possible for Shen Fuzhong, on coming to England, within a few weeks he was able to talk with English professional scientists and people in official positions, and to work in organizing the books in Oxford University. I think there might have been very major impact from this, because the Kangxi Emperor was known for his curiosity about foreign powers, and he might have heard about this story, but, it's a big but, Shen Fuzhong died of a fever, a very dangerous illness, just after he left England. So what might have been a major cultural change became simply a curiosity of history. But that's where I'm spending some of my time now, and some other scholars are as well.
So I think now there's a great controversy about the official narrative of Chinese contemporary history. So since the people are talking about, China, we start depicting China from the Opium War. So what's your view of the Chinese official narrative of its contemporary history?
That perhaps has received more attention than necessary, or even then is helpful for the debate now. And China was split ideologically in the 1840s about the opium problem, how to handle it. As you know, some Chinese very powerful officials thought that perhaps opium should be legalized because then the government could supervise and tax and derive income, instead of having all the income go to the foreign importers. And that leads you into a highly complicated history. But the so-called official narrative depends which historian is writing what and who is supporting them. Is it simply the commercial market? Is it the ordinary publishing market? Publishing can be conducted without official guidance, as we know, and maybe we need more openness in the present.
So, what's the big difference between your generation of sinologists and the current one?
Well, the first point I'd make is that I don't regard myself as a sinologist. I see sinology as the field of a classical Chinese and the classical textual tradition, and a good, serious knowledge of different intellectual movements in the Confucian and pre-Confucian period. So I think it's a huge area. I think there were very few sinologists, and until recently, and particularly when I was a student, Chinese studies really were still very much under what we might call broad sort of Cold War theories. And so Russia and China both had influence on the political development, and that was simply accepted, so that the idea of politicization of Chinese history was pretty much built into the field. And many of the teachers in the field, it was very hard for Western analysts of China to see where China was going. And we know now that the information we received was often very inaccurate, or was always pushed in one direction or another. People themselves studying China represent a whole range of opinions, from affection to China to real nervousness or even fear. But it's a strong group, so it seems to me intellectually very lively field, and I think that's excellent, that should be so. And there's more teaching of Chinese language, for instance in American primary schools, and China itself is very skillful at learning Western language, so that back to the time of Shun Fuzhong, we have perhaps a new kind of common language and a new chance of China meeting with the West at a creative level. The free flow of information is a very, very important factor. And that would not just be true for the West, but it would be true for China as well.
经过半个小时的采访，尽管我的问题始终关注今天的中国与世界的互动，以及今天中国与世界的关系，但老先生始终回到他所擅长、所熟悉的领域，也就是通过从明末、清初、民国时代乃至90年以前中国的这样一个历史的描述，来讨论今天中国与世界的关系。 我想这提供了一种非那么直接的视角，但是这个视角也给我们足以多的信息去消化和理解今天的中国。老先生最后的一句话：信息的自由流动对今天的中国理解世界以及西方理解中国都非常重要。我想以此来作为我们今天这个采访的结束，那就是信息自由流动的重要性。